How's everybody doing this morning?
Well, good morning.
Good. Everybody look like they're bright, awake, except for you. We glad to have you out this morning. I would like to go ahead and get started if possible. Before Mrs. Evans gets started, I want to ask if there are any public comments. Do we have any public comments at this point? If not, then I'm going to ask Mrs. Evans to give us a brief introduction of what we're going to be discussing today.
Good morning, Pastor Moody and members of the board. This morning, we will not have a report from Instructional Council. Our actual monthly meeting will take place tomorrow. So next month, you will receive those updates. Also, agenda item number 3 is left over from last month. We will begin by reviewing what the district and the individual schools have done in preparation for MSTEP. We have a couple of building principals here. We have district supervisors here, and we have Steve Petros here. All of them will use about 5 to 10 minutes to share with you the steps that they have taken in preparation for getting the district set up for, that didn't make sense, but getting the district set up for MSTEP. The other focus is literacy. Upon your request, you asked for an indication of what the research is saying about literacy, and we sent you some articles. I also provided you a summary of the research. We will summarize just highlights from that 2 or 3 page summary. We have our district results. Mr. Steve Petros will provide us district results, and then we also have Ron Gorman, who will also share results from the ACT, and then each division will also share at a very high level the strategies that are being utilized to address literacy within their division. You all know that we have been working toward putting together a pre-K-12 structure for ensuring that our kids are literate. Some of that will come out in this conversation, and I can tell you there is probably more than we can cover in this short amount of time, but we intend to provide a high-level introduction to what is happening across the district and what we think will happen, should happen, and I'll stop talking so we can begin that process at this time.
Okay,
Is that okay?
that's fine.
Thank you. Okay. So our first topic is going to be MSTEP.
MSTEP, yep, so,
Okay.
We have just a short PowerPoint, but we have copies for you.
Thank you.
thank you.
And it's the same thing that you have on your slides if you want to follow along that way. Good morning,
Morning.
Morning.
Pastor Moody, board members. I'm Amy Powney, math curriculum, and we're just here to talk to you a little bit about giving you some background on the MSTEP and some things that we introduced to some of the building leadership this year, and with the teachers with some of the professional development that happened, and to give you just a little bit of background. So on the first slide, there's just a quote there that was from the MDE parent letter that went out talking about the Michigan Student Test of Educational Progress, or the MSTEP, being given online in grades 3 through 8. And it was going to be in 11, and it was going to be measuring this year's content in ELA, science, social studies, and math. Some of the highlights that we just wanted to point out to you that were new for our teachers and our students this year were that tests was being given in the spring instead of the fall, obviously, right beginning right after spring break, assessing this year's content as opposed to last year's content. Providing some challenges, of course, for students who are taking it right after spring break with an entire marking period of school left to go. It was going to test math and English language arts at all grades, and social studies in grades 5, 8, and 11, and science in grades 4, 7, and 11. And it's being all taken online. And the tests are still like the MEP test previously not timed.
You said it's not timed?
It's not timed. They have suggested times that they give as an outline, but they're not. Students are allowed the amount of time that they need to take it. And we just included the schedule there. Having been scheduled a month earlier, it would have, it's almost over now. But it kind of outlines for you when grade levels were taking different portions of the test.
Yeah, sixth grade is taking it now, right?
Right.
They're just, the third and sixth graders are just beginning, yeah.
Good morning. I'm Roseanne Wall, ELA curriculum. And these are just some of the highlights of the new MSTEP. We do know that the new MSTEP does have the smarter balanced items, that have already been field tested, so IMSTEP includes those items. And it also very closely follows the blueprint of the smarter balanced assessment, so that's something we did. We studied that and we kind of put a blueprint together, a proposed blueprint of the MSTEP, kind of giving an idea of roughly how many minimum questions there are, what are the standards that are going to be assessed, lengths of passages, things like that, kind of giving a guide. We do know that Michigan has contracted with the DRC for the MSTEP for the next 3 years.
DRC?
Yes, that is a company that is creating field-tested interim assessments as well as put the MSTEP together.
Data Recognition
Data.
Corporation, I believe.
Yes,
I think
please.
that's correct.
Data
And
Recognition
it's
Corporation.
the engine that, the computer piece of it, that I'm sure Steve will speak to even more eloquently.
Right. Well, our 11th graders, this year we know, took the ACT. The next year they'll be taking the redesigned SAT. It is a paper pencil test. Our 11th graders are also going to be taking the MSTEP. They took it this year, they will be taking it next year as well. And then that MSTEP will include English language arts, math, social studies, and science, and then they also have the work keys. The work keys and the SAT 2016 will be taken in March, and then, of course, later on, their step will be taken. So the summary of the features for ELA, we know it is an online test. There will be a listening component to it. So, we had to make sure that our students had all headphones available to all our students, kind of having them getting used to that listening comprehension part of it. There is a multiple choice section of the test, but then there is also a classroom activity and a performance test, so we will speak to a little bit about it a little later on in the presentation.
And for the mathematics, you can see the online session ranged from an hour and a half estimated time to 2 hours. That hour and a half for the online portion of the test was for our elementary students, 3rd through 5th grade, and then 2 hours estimated for our 6th through 11th grade students. I will say, I don't know, different things I've heard from buildings is that for both ELA and math, the estimated times were lacking, that students, they were going quite a bit over. So it's quite grueling. It's a long test. There's a classroom activity as well for mathematics that's done in the classroom for 30 minutes, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but it really is just a preparation for the performance task. There's nothing that's reported on or graded in that. It's really a preparation to get them ready for the performance task. And that is another online piece that's that takes approximately an hour. Social studies and science this year were simply the same test that they've taken in past years as the MEP, but it was put into a fixed form online test. So there was no change to what they were tested on this year for science and social studies. They each require 2 50-minute sessions. that poses challenges as well, something that we talk to principals and teachers about, because you'll see from examples that we have for you in a second that items and expectations for the ELA and mathematics tests are very, very different than what the MEP expected of students. But then they had to be ready to shift back to the old multiple choice fixed form test, where it's very different, as you'll see, for the M step. So that posed challenges as well.
So this is an example of a grade 3 sample item. You can find more examples on the MSTEP practice site, on the MDE website. This is the way the students would actually see the test. The text would be on their left, and they can scroll the text up and down. They would see one question at a time. Some of the questions within the English language arts test were multiple choice, and of course, some of them were constructed responses where they actually had to type their answers down. And
So this is a third grade level question here.
correct. So this-
Inference.
Yeah, I'm looking at that word.
I taught college English. I'm really a third grader. Inference?
Yeah,
Wow.
along with the fact that if you think about attending to a piece of reading that you must scroll through and read and attend to also.
Correct.
I guess I understand that they should be able to find an inference, but for them to understand that particular vocabulary word,
So
and that, so are the teachers familiar with what words will be prompted for the children on these things, so they can be taught that word, or?
this is kind of stepping out of this, and I'm sure.
Yeah,
it'll be
sorry. It
mentioned.
just
No,
was a
that's
strong
fine.
reaction when you see that
True.
question for a third grader.
Right, so
but-
one of the things we did was all our common assessments also mirror the question stems that the students would see
Okay.
on the M step. Plus we, gave guides, so that should be kind of in the system, because you're right, third grade, we're looking at inferencing. And then we also did a vertical alignment K-12 of the literacy skills that are needed, and so you can see that gradual scope and sequence of increase of,
If I may, similar to Dr. Phelps' question, do you feel that the level of teaching prepares students to take the test? So in other words, what they're doing daily, teachers teaching daily, is that equipping our students to be able to engage in a test like that?
I believe they are. Our teachers have been prepared, and this has been coming because we talked about in 2010, right? We kind of adopted the Common Core standards, and so that rigor was already put into our curriculum and into our instructional framework and our instruction. So it has been a slow process, but it's being put into the system a little at a time.
You said mirror stamped, or you used a phrase I was unfamiliar with. You said something about things were mirror stamped, or used the word mirror.
Oh, she was mentioning that our common assessments mirror Smarter Balance question types. So in other words, we've analyzed the sample items and the blueprints and the item specifications that Smarter Balance has available, and knowing that the bank came from Smarter Balance, we were doing the best we could to make sure that question types on our common assessments mirror that. So as an example, I'm looking at the fifth grade sample item for math that I'm showing you. Something new to students is this idea of select all expressions that are equal to 3 1/4. So, students in the past have been very, very used to one answer, multiple choice. And these tests very often and this is a short prompt, and sometimes there are long prompts that somewhere in there ask them to select all that apply or choose all. So that's another thing that we've talked about with our teachers as well, and made sure that we're in our common assessments, that they see those kinds of items, so that they're prepared for the different item types that they're going to get.
Particularly with math, I know that with the Common Core, I mean, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like traditional math. And so as a parent trying to help with homework, no, Mom, that's not the way you do it, because I learned it this way, and then they revert back to, this is the way I was taught, and this is how I'm going to help you get it done, because that's the object. You want to get it done, hand it in your homework. So how are you guys helping parents really understand this new math that they have to, that their kids are exposed to, and that as parents, we have no choice either, because we have to help them somehow or get a tutor for them or something, but.
And that is a challenge. That is a challenge. I understand that parents, it's very difficult when you know one way and your child comes home seeing another way of doing something. The idea here is to build the flexibility in thinking, and I think it really, it's a message that I think we try to send out to our teachers when we are working with them and helping them understand the standards and build their understanding, that's a message that needs to also, that they want to share with parents. And on our standards report cards now, they reflect the Common Core standards, so that you would see that flexibility in thinking that is sort of there that you can kind of see in the standards as they're written. We have, you'll see at the end of this, we had a handout for parents, or a website connection for parents that led them to different websites that have some videos about the Common Core and information about the standards and things like that. But I think there's certainly always more that can be done to inform parents through evenings that happen at school and things like that, where they can work with them, because really, when it comes to the Common Core mathematics, it's really about that flexibility in thinking and that approach, that multiple approaches to things. So, and I know that there are buildings that work on informing parents of doing that.
Definitely, and
Let me ask a question. For the third grade test, and the fifth grade math, are we actually teaching our students to take these kinds of tests? Are they being prepared to take these types of tests with these types of wording?
Pastor Moody, I feel them dancing around that question because it's sort of political, but what I can say is that these ladies they actually sit on the committee to help write the assessment, so I think they're very knowledgeable. But the other piece is, what they have done is taken the blueprint, and that work continues, that the assessments are based upon. And they have transitioned our assessments so that they mimic the M-STEP assessment.
Yeah, I understand.
So that many times.
I
So
understand
that was the first part, but now does instruction?
Yes.
It varies according to how much teachers truly understand the shifts and expectations related to the new Common Core state standards. So there is a written curriculum, there is a taught curriculum and assessed curriculum. And we think that we are getting there with the written. There is, through our professional development, will help teachers to continually understand the shifts, the behavioral and instructional shifts that they must take and around instruction and assessment.
But Dr. Fall brought up a very good point. And how does a third grader know how to understand the word inference or its meaning in order to do the test? I'm looking at it, I'm saying, gosh, if I'm a third grader, I look at that word and say, what in the world is this? If it never came up on a spelling test, or we never had to do anything in terms of writing a sentence with it, how would they know what that word means? What does the word inference mean to a third grader? Now, that's what I'm talking about. Are we teaching our third graders these types of words to prepare themselves for these kinds of tests? Because this test is, in my opinion, is pretty advanced.
It is very advanced. And we don't want to sound like we are sounding the alarm, but it is advanced.
And that's okay, but my question is, are we teaching our children these things so that they can be prepared to take these tests? The other thing too is that even with the math, Bernard, you got a question about the math?
No, just somebody later tell me, I think it's the first one and the last one are all expressed. Somebody let me know. A and E is what I figured, but
So part of our audit that is coming about, that's going to take place as a result of our partnership with ASCD, is to audit curriculum through the lens of the written curriculum and what is actually being taught. If it aligns with what we see on paper, and have we been able to change our behaviors to address the challenges of this that you see in this document. So perhaps I could guess, but I don't want to guess, but perhaps at a later date, we can give you more concrete information about where we are in making those behavioral shifts.
Go ahead.
No, actually, I was just gonna, you just pulled the word shift out of my mouth. I kind of rewind to our conversation yesterday with the Harvard visit that a few folks took, and I even recognize the questions that are coming from the committee right now are talking about what is our teachers teaching this, and et cetera, and I don't know, so I don't really have a question, maybe just more of a philosophical point when you talk about shift. I think we do really top to bottom need to start focusing on what the students learn. Now, of course, what teachers teaching are an element of that. But I don't know. Again, I don't have a particular question or point. When you said the word shift, I was just reminiscing on our conversation last night and thinking that there's some merit to what that discussion was about and where we need to go, even with this topic itself. So, not really a question, just more of a thinking aloud, I guess.
Dr. Fall.
So we will have I'm sorry.
No, that's,
We will have the
do we have?
principals, I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
We'll have the principals come forward at this time.
Did you have something else that you wanted to add?
Well, it was just this structure of the step and a little bit of the difference between the MEP that our students are used to. So we have the content, right, that we have to be aware of, but it's also the way that the students are assessed. So in the MEP, they had one correct answer, so you could read in, process of elimination, say, okay, this is the correct answer, but with the step, there could be potentially 2 or 3 correct answers. So now you have to make sure students are reading all the answers. Then there are questions where it's called hard text, where they would have to highlight. So, these are skills that we have to teach our students. With the performance task, it is the writing part of the test. And so our students get assessed on all the 3 different text types of writing. So they have to be very knowledgeable of the elements of all those 3 text types of writing, because they could be asked to just write just the paragraph, the introduction paragraph, or in the extended writing, they will be asked to write a full-length text. So whether it's a narrative or an informational piece or an opinion piece of writing. So they have to be fluent in all those pieces of writing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Wendy.
What is I know it's just anecdotal, but what is your sense with the students' shift in the different mode of test taking thus far? Has there been any sort of sense coming out of the classrooms, or?
As far as feedback?
Yeah.
Testing, well, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the actual students, but I have a meeting, I brought all the coaches together, the elementary coaches, and have had this conversation, and the feeling, besides that the test was taking longer than what, MDE had said, this was the time limit. Overall, taking it online, they seem to like it a lot better than the MEP. It is aligned with the standards, so actually assessing now, what you're teaching to. It's also aligned with, they have places where they've actually seen the alignment between what was in the curriculum and how the common assessments were written to how they were assessed at the end. So that, it doesn't seem like it is in just different compartments, but there's a clear alignment.
So the other piece, Dr. Fall, before they come up, is that the question came about parents on the back of this presentation that was handed out to principals, is a connection to tools that parents can also use to start getting their kids prepared for this assessment. And the other thing is, at the end of this conversation, Steve Petros will come forward, because a group of us have been visiting buildings to kind of see and begin to gauge how students are responding to the assessment. And from that, we drew out 5 very early observations about ways that, or directions that we could take to support the system. They're very early observations, however, and we'll be doing this through the end of the testing cycle.
My 11-year-old came home talking about it, that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah. The other encouragement I would say is that, aside from giving a link, it would be nice to contextualize it for our district. So it's not just that parents are getting a huge Common Core website, but really, our district is showing them, this is what it looks like. I think for us as parents, it would be nice to be able to know, like you said, that shift. This is a shift that's taking place, and when I get that aha moment, I'm gonna prepare myself to be able to help my child in some way. Or if the school is doing something with me to help me get there as well, I think that's gonna help us. But if we can contextualize it so that it's not just generic, but it really breaks it down to these levels that parents can, oh, that applies to me, I can see that. And then I think they'll be better equipped to do the task of helping in whatever way they can with their kids, so.
Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Great, how are you guys? Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, do you want us to answer any specific questions that you have, or do you want just how we prepared kids, or what we thought about the test as we were administering, and what's your... Well, I would agree with what the ladies were saying, that the test took a lot longer for our kids, so we'll just kind of start with some of the things that we were seeing the same. Our kids do know the word inference. The teachers are very well aware of it, so they are being taught how to inference and how to come up with that information.
Pretty cool.
The passages are very long, and scrolling down is a skill that they had to learn. But our kids did go on the practice sites, so they practiced those things. They learned how to highlight on the computer, which is different than highlighting, you know, with your marker in class. So a lot of the things that we were very tentative about, we did have the kids practice on the computer, and we also prepared teachers as well. I know that starting back in January was, giving teachers sites for like text-to-text comparisons, so that when the kids came to those, they would know how to do text-to-text, practice sites, words to use. They need to know the word inference, so make sure you're using it daily, using it in written work. So those were some of the things that I was, as I listed to them, that, we have answers for.
I'm Joanne Remersma. I'm principal over at Stocking School. So thank you for the opportunity to do some reflecting. We're not quite done with it yet, but it's good to talk with you. In preparation, we really wanted our teachers to be able to align instruction, just like you said, to what are those assessment targets. You all nailed it. That's the critical part right there. Are we aligning teaching and learning to those assessment targets? So basically, we've been working really hard to get to know our targets. The targets have changed. Those shifts are big. You saw it in math at home with your own child. Those shifts are huge. The math practices are huge. So at Stocking School, we started in January with, I send out It's Elementary every week to my staff, and part of that It's Elementary came directly from the SBAC portal, where I was directing staff at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade we're using the transition document that we use with the curriculum team to where to begin, where to begin, and it began with guided practice. It certainly didn't begin with giving kids assessments and seeing how they did, with just guiding them through to see where are our deficit areas, where do we need to put more time and effort. So started that in January. For me, as the building leader, that meant every Sunday, sitting in my office on that portal, getting to know the standards. Because what Roseanne said is very true. This is a direct reflection of the standards. There is no question in my mind that they are well aligned. When we left that MEP test, we'd go, well, not quite sure how anything fit together. But when you leave this test, you say arduous, rigorous, incredibly time-consuming, but it's a direct reflection of the standards. So we got to put a lot of eggs into the basket of really understanding our standards deeply, and they are very deep standards. So it's taking us some time to get there. We're on it, though. We really are. If I looked at math, and I think that that was a huge concern, and I would agree that parents are really struggling right now with how to look at the math practices, the math reasoning that's going on right now that's very different than the calculation that we practiced as kiddos. It's a huge shift. And one of the things that at Stocking we've been doing is we've been working with Calvin College since last year of 100 hours of PD around math reasoning, operational fluency, and math discourse. We came upon a strategy that we thought was very successful called Number Talks. So we began videotaping our Number Talks to show them to parents. Because I think when you see the kids reasoning out math problems, using partitioning, using area models, using halving and doubling, you say to yourself, way better than the traditional algorithm of borrowing and carrying. It's very different. It's thoughtful. And what we found on this test is if you can't do those things, they're never going to ask you to calculate 750 times 12. That's not going to be the way they go. They're going to show you models, and you got to decide which of those models accurately reflects the thinking behind 750 groups of 12. And then when they give you the answer, they're not going to ask you for the answer. They're going to say, here's 4 different ways to represent the answer. 62 remainder of 6, 62.5, 62 and 50, I mean hundreds. I mean, it's very different than the math that we did. So getting our kids to think flexibly is really important. ELA, our kids are going to struggle with the multiple text. You know, she showed you one piece of one text. There's probably 3 selections on that 3rd grade test that our kids had to read in order to answer questions. So, you know, it's very different than the kinds of the MEPs that we're used to. Just know that. So in terms of prep, we've been working really hard on those things.
It's good to hear you say that because it's important as our children begin to reasoning with this new M-STEP program, and also at the same time, understanding that English in terms of math is definitely changing, at least from where I used to know it to be. So I'm sitting here watching my colleague figure this out. You know, you almost have to understand English clearly and have a comprehension of reading, so literacy is going to be very important for these new types of M-STEPs for math.
Oh, absolutely. The directions for performance task, I think Ms. Evans made the comment when she came into Stocking to watch this test, was the directions were as lengthy as the problem itself.
Yeah.
So you're right.
And your practice, how soon do you get the results when you finish practicing? Does the computer show you right away what your mistakes are?
They told us 2 weeks, but we haven't seen the 8th grade scores yet.
I haven't seen anything yet.
And I
It's
want-
just practicing though, right? This is not exactly the test.
Well, this is,
This is
This
it.
is a-
Test.
This is the pilot.
Okay.
This is
So-
baseline, yeah.
I want to piggyback on what Joanne was saying, is that we also started Number Talks. We did work with Calvin College, but we did our own PLCs for priority school around Number Talks, and it was very beneficial. And it was amazing to go in and listen to kids think through a multiplication problem, because we did learn it very differently. And how many different ways that they can come up with it, and using all kinds of processes that make sense to them. And then talking about, well, what was the most efficient way to find the answer? You know, you could break it down into several steps, but if you know those steps, then you know how to do this. So using those Number Talks was very valuable, and I think will be very beneficial for our scores, that kids were able to figure that out.
And I'm Donna Bowman, I'm principal at Riverside Middle, and I brought along a few things, just let me show you.
Thank you.
To get ready. teachers don't panic, because if you have the content, if you're following the curriculum, you're preparing for the content right from the first day. But there are other issues that we had to address, and one of them is exactly what we were talking about, and I didn't bring enough of these for everybody, but I'll let you see this one. We started in November with an academic vocabulary exercise. These are the words that kids are supposed to be able to know how to do in order to answer the questions. So there's a 6th to 8th grade band, a 9th to 11th grade band, and a 3rd to 5th grade band. So we started back in November with a school-wide initiative to learn all of those words in every classroom, every bulletin board, 3 words a week as a basic. So we started way back in November. We started with the transition readiness timeline in January and did everything that we were supposed to do, and we had support from the district for that. We had an extensive PD session for teachers at the comprehensive middles in February to go over the question stems and the learning targets. We followed up with PLCs so that the teachers could write their formative assessments in the form that that students would be seeing on the test. Then we got into the classroom into the computer lab starting in February and letting the kids practice. The one the teachers were most concerned about was the tools on the computers, the different tools highlighting and that. That was the least worry for the kids.
definitely
They
the
could care
least.
less, they had that like that. But what we did spend quite a bit of time doing was developing reading stamina with this scrolling. We gave the kids a lot of practice with that because that is something they don't do a lot. A lot of kids this age that read are used to reading an MLive two paragraphs, so they're not used to the extensive scrolling, questions over here, scrolling up and down, looking for the answers. So we did a lot of practice with that. We did a lot of practice with students constructing their answer online, because most students to this point, for the previous test, graphic organizer on paper, write it on paper, and then type what they wrote. So the constructing the answer is a different experience for a lot of our students. You talked about the learning bands. You can just take a look at these. We gave one of each of these to our teachers, but these are the targets. You just want to look at these. This is the math binder for 1 grade target. This is the ELA binder for 1 grade. And those were prepared by curriculum directors. So we took those from our principals, and we gave these to the teachers so that they had to be clear what they were asking the students before the students could be clear. It's very, very extensive. One thing that we wanted to do this year that we were not able to do before the test was put the science and social studies test online, the common assessments. We would still like to do that for next year, so that students are testing all year the way they will be testing at the end of the year. We found a free online program. We might be able to do that for next year, and I think curriculum is working on that.
Yeah.
Curriculum is working on that, so. And then the only other thing that we did at Riverside that was a little bit different was buildings had the option to order the individual test, to give the test in the order that they wanted to. We did ours a little bit differently. We started with the performance tasks instead of the classroom activity, and that worked out quite well for us. So I don't know if we're gonna get a chance to reflect on that as principals, what worked and what didn't work, but that's what we did. Those words, the words that are going to be in the test most likely, like if you don't know those words, you don't understand what the question is asking. We also sent home a copy of all those words and definitions to parents so that they could work on those words at home. Parents love that. They told us, it's on the refrigerator, we're working on it. So that was a good way to get parents involved. They really like that piece.
Yeah, I was gonna allude to the technology part of all of this. online testing for teachers. How difficult was that, or?
For my building, it was just a matter of scheduling, and it actually was a lot easier to have the kids on the computers versus the booklets and passing those out and making sure that those all came back. That actually made it much easier. The thing that was the most hindrance was how long it took. So I had some fifth graders that were, very diligent, and it took them 4.5 hours to finish the test. Because they wanted to make sure that they were putting out their very best effort. And they didn't want to just, most of our kids took about 2.5 hours. That was probably the average.
And that's one
amount.
test ticket.
That's one test.
So there's most, in fourth and fifth, they had 7 test tickets. So give it context.
7 test days.
So there's
or
7 test
sessions.
tickets, yeah, that they have. And so for one of those, it would be about 2.5 hours. Now, just imagine back, I don't know if you all have kids old enough to take the ACT, but getting them to take it once was hard. Getting them to take it twice was almost impossible. And so we're talking 7 tickets of 2.5, 3 hours. That's a lot, just to give you some context around that.
And I think one of the biggest things was kids that don't have computers at home were not very good at typing out their responses. It took them a long time. And just being able to draft from their brains
Yep.
to typing and
Skill.
versus writing, like
Right.
That's a huge skill.
Mrs. Bowman said, it takes a whole nother level. So making sure that we're getting the younger kids to some keyboarding, but then when you have to have enough computers to be able to do that consistently. It can't be just a once a week thing. So.
Yeah, I think, we talk about testing online and putting our tests online, you know what? But it has to be instruction, that we're really doing relevant things with our children day in and day out, so that they want to be online, engaging in conversation and blogging. From Mrs. Evans, we had an opportunity this year to do One City, One Book, and I know my kids from Stocking blogged constantly.
Yeah, they loved it.
They learned how to type through their blogs on this One Crazy Summer book. And that led the teachers to wanting to be a Google Classroom, and that led everybody into, our surveys are done Google Classroom. So the good news is, it's really pushed us forward in our instruction and our learning to be a little bit more savvy on how we're thinking about using technology day in and day out. So it did push us, which was needed. It was definitely needed. But it would be nice to have the technology to do it.
For the record, I believe so firmly in a standards-based education, and so this is all good news. I mean, the length and rigor of the test is tough, but, so this is great news, and I'm expecting, I know from research that when we're measuring these sort of proficiency levels, that you'd see a taper off in older grades with the sense that deep critical thinking hadn't been developed and that recognized. So hopefully we see with a standards-based education that we don't see a drop off on gains that are made in the early years. So I'm pleased to see this is happening, and I'm just appreciative of all the staff that has to make this sea change and all the work, the weekend work and everything else that goes into doing that. So
The good teachers know what the standards base is good learning for kids. So they're all on board.
The other thing I would say is that it's nice to hear that, our teachers are not teaching to the test, which is always an accusation, but really they're doing good teaching. And then the students are reflecting that as they take these tests. And that's really important, I think, for our parents to hear that message too, because a lot of times that's the fear, or for that matter, broader community. But it sounds like I'm hearing that our teachers they're teaching the content, and then the kids are reflecting that as they're doing these, because they've seen it, they've been doing it, and now it's similar, and it's a reflection of what they're doing. So that's nice. Thanks.
Mr. Ross?
I just want to thank you guys, really. Seems you're really setting a good foundation for what obviously is going to be a real transitionary phase here, but it seems like you guys are crossing T's and dotting I's, and that's really encouraging. So really just thank you for your efforts and your work with this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
You want this book back, or is this mine to keep?
No, I gotta take it. That's from my shelf. I have my own M-Step shelf now.
Thank you. Can I have this, those words? I'm curious. Well, that's okay, keep it. No big deal. I was just more curious. Sure. Just, thank you.
They're posted all over the school.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good, thank you. Give me 1 minute to patch in here. Well, good morning. My name is Steve Petros. I serve as an assessment specialist in the Office of Information Services. And I recognize that this part of the agenda has already kind of dragged over its targeted timeline, so I'll try to keep my comments brief. And I know my colleagues have already shared a lot of the pieces already, so I will try not to duplicate those parts of the conversation. With respect to M-Step and my access in these past few months, this has really been a transition year. That's been the message that's been kind of shared from MDE to the districts, and that's been our message to the schools and to the system, is that this is about transitions. And just to highlight a few of the transitions, I think Amy and Roseanne mentioned, certainly the shift from a fall to a spring assessment, the shift from a paper pencil to an online test delivery. And just for context on that note, I'm very pleased to share that within GRPS, all of our students taking the M-Step test participated online. Whereas statewide, I believe the split was 83% online and 17% paper pencil. That was an option from a state perspective. We chose to go online with the option to administer paper pencil tests on a case-by-case basis, but in reality, it was 100% online. So very pleased with that. Certainly the alignment piece, you've heard that term alignment mentioned time and again this past half hour or so, and that's been a critical part of this transition from MEEP to M-Step. And then with respect to the online reporting piece, I think it was referenced earlier, we're actually anticipating raw scores from the first set of tests for grades 5 and 8 soon, just raw scores, but without any real context behind them. Because as part of this shift to a new assessment, the state needs to certainly take all of the results from the online tests for all the grades, plus the results from the paper and pencil tests, that's 17% of the state, which will take longer to score. And then over the summer, they'll conduct a standard setting process. And then they'll create kind of the cut scores per se. And then we'll actually receive formal official results in the fall. And those will be available online. So again, we anticipate raw scores soon, and the official scores won't come for several more months. Our office, OIS, as we're now known as, so we provided several trainings for our principals and building test coordinators back during the late winter months, and just kind of did the highlights of those sessions. We reviewed the goals from MDE for spring testing. Again, transition kind of being the key word. We walked through the testing schedule. You recall that Roseanne and Amy shared a graphic of that identified kind of the 3-week windows for grades 5-8, 4-7, 3-6, plus a much longer window for the high school students. The accountability implications, and what we really mean by that was the shift for MDE to drop the performance piece for the state test for accountability purposes. Meaning for this year, as the inaugural year, it's really about participation. Making sure that we have those high levels of participation, that's what will move forward into the accountability piece. With respect to student performance, that will come into play next year. The test components, broadly, it's the online test, the classroom activity, the performance task. I'm not going to go into that. I know Amy and Roseanne already hit that from the instructional curricular perspective. We went through a mock testing schedule, and specifically, we were most concerned with that 3-week window from the end of April until just last Friday, because internally, that directly overlaps with our NWEA testing. So we're talking about a competition for resources. By resources, we mean technology and people. And we were most concerned about our K-8 buildings because they had to provide M-Step for grades 4 and 7, 2 grade levels in the building, as well as grades K through 8, 9 grade levels for NWEA. And that was really a logistical challenge. And to my understanding, they all pulled it off, and they were great in doing so, but it took a lot of pre-planning, a lot of thoughtful, logistical, creative scheduling to make sure that happened. And certainly that's always a challenge. And then, of course, just broadly preparing for MSTEP, which, when we discussed this, certainly during the late winter months, but in reality, this has been going on for 5 years, ever since the 2010 adoption of the Common Core State Standards. The state's joining of the Smarter Balance Consortium shortly thereafter. There's been multiple practice tests, pilot tests, field tests over the past couple of years. So it's been a 5-year process, but we were really kind of talking about more what can be done here at the 11th hour. We talked about different supports and accommodations that were available to students during the testing period, for example, text-to-speech. We talked about the process of actually setting up the online testing sessions, identifying what students would participate in what test, what component of the test, on what day, at what time, in what lab, proctored by what teacher. Again, a lot of logistics there. We reviewed the technology components, the test taker application, if you will, the process by which as students actually respond to answers, those student answers or responses are actually saved on a local server immediately once they're submitted. And then at roughly every 15 minutes or so, those responses from a district perspective are then uploaded to DRC, Data Recognition Corps, to their servers. So roughly every 15 minutes, our responses are constantly being uploaded. We talked about the various roles and responsibilities. What is the principal responsible for, the building test coordinator, the teachers, any other staff that might have an active role, just trying to clarify who's responsible for what so that no key tasks fall through the cracks. And then again, just planning considerations. Again, more logistics, more planning on who's doing what and when. And honestly considering, well, what's the opportunity cost? What has to be given up in order to meet these expectations? From a feedback perspective, a couple different tiers of feedback. There's certainly feedback from the school to the district, and what I mean by that broadly is, or most often is, the building test coordinator to the Office of Information Services. And there's about 3 or 4 of us in our office that are fielding those emails and phone calls. Certainly we get support from MIS and help desk for the more hardware connectivity related issues. But by and large, that was the communication chain in terms of from the schools to the district office. From the district to the ISD, our Kent Intermediate School District had an ongoing online survey that districts from around the county could continuously provide feedback to. And we know that that actually was then looked at and shared with MDE representatives also, because certainly MDE values not only GRPS, but also Kent County, and there's a feedback loop there as well. And then also we had a direct kind of feedback loop between GRPS and MDE. On occasion, through really more informal channels, conversations and telephone calls, some emails, the state would ask for our opinion on how our students, teachers, buildings, technology, infrastructure, how they were doing so that they can make adjustments along the way. I think one notable piece there is, as we're all aware, those first 2 or 3 days after spring break, when the ELA test for grades 5 and 8 was significantly longer than anticipated, MDE was asking for feedback, and they responded, and I compliment them, within, I believe, 3 days, making a shift such that the requirement of having the student finish the test on the same day in which they start, they kind of let that go and allowed students to continue on the next day or some other subsequent date. Broadly, in general, it's really gone very well. It's been very well received, meaning the shift to online testing. It's been a good experience, I think, with respect to the expectations. But the caveat there is I think expectations were a little bit low to begin with. But whether based upon feedback that we hear from the building level, broadly it's been well received. Based on some larger county-wide conversation at the state level, at the county level, through the Kent Learning Collaborative, really good feedback from districts across the county. I was at a state event a week ago. Again, same sentiments, broadly well received. Certainly there are glitches, there are individual cases, there are issues that need to be improved internally, externally, but by and large it's been really good. MD's done a nice job with their communication. They've had a weekly newsletter, an e-newsletter called Spotlight, that's been available for the past probably 6 months or so. That's been really helpful on keeping people informed on not only what's to come, but any changes. The technology, whether it be the hardware or the connectivity issues, the infrastructure here within the district, or the connections to DRC, has been really quite sound. For those occasions when students have lost connectivity, they've been able to log in really rather quickly with their same login credentials. Not always, but overwhelmingly so. I think you heard earlier that the students have been really good in their perseverance, their tenacity, their ability to really try to keep fatigue at bay as best they can, despite the long testing times. That's been a challenge, and our students have responded really well to that. I think in some of the sample questions that Amy and Roseanne shared, there were some embedded technology tools, some highlighters, some sticky notes, and magnifiers. Our kids use those really rather well. There's still a lot of room for improvement there, but that's been a nice piece. And then DRC, we do need to compliment them for their customer service. They've been really great with respect to our phone calls and answering the questions, doing so in a confident manner, and resolving those tech issues really quite quickly. So DRC has been really wonderful. But there have been challenges too, certainly. Internally, just the logistics of scheduling the students, the classes, the testing sessions. That's been tough, especially for the prior 3 weeks when we had MAP testing and M-STEP and My Access all overlapping each other. That was a real logistical challenge. We continue to have issues or challenges where students will actually log in and then exit a test in the same minute, like right away. And they don't do so intentionally necessarily, but intentionally they might exit the test, and that locks the test, which requires someone to actually call DRC, and they need to unlock that test session or that test event, which delays the whole testing experience, but that's an issue. I think Carolyn mentioned earlier that the directions for some of the tests are quite long. They're a bit verbose. They're thorough, but there's a point of diminishing returns as well. And so I think we need to, well, not that we can control that, but hopefully the state can modify those directions for the students so that they are clear and concise, clear and yet concise, so that they're more brief. Testing fatigue. This might occur within a single test event, but broadly, especially for our 4th and 7th graders, they had to complete M-STEP testing and MAP testing in the same 3-week window. So it's testing fatigue in the context of a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then the exposure issue. And while our students have had access to practice tests, pilots, field tests over the past couple of years, it's been a challenge at times to bring those into the system at scale in a rather seamless, integrated manner. And so that's one area that we need to really work on. In terms of next steps, what can we do between now and next year's M-STEP? Well, certainly there's the alignment piece, and I think that's been mentioned again and again. Having that alignment between the written curriculum, the enacted or the taught curriculum, and the assessed curriculum, and just keeping those tightly aligned. We heard, I think Lisa mentioned keyboarding. We need to do a better job of kind of integrating that into the instructional model so our students are more familiar with that for next year. The scheduling piece, I think there's a good learning curve this year that can be refined in the future. We've talked about this notion of having instructional labs and testing labs. 2 computer labs per building. That's still certainly an expense associated with that. And building-based testing teams where we have certainly the principal, but then maybe an M-STEP guru or a MAP guru or a DIBBLES guru or whatever other assessments are in the building so that there's ownership. And then, of course, the conversation of do we possibly move our district assessments online as well? Would that help kind of support the M-STEP and My Access piece? So.
And make a comment that I hope feedback, I know the legislation is out there to shift sinking funds to technology, and I know it's so uneven across districts, so I hope some of the feedback with the logistical challenges that we must not be alone, that would help to move legislation towards allowing those funds to go towards technology upgrades, rather than bonding them.
Yeah. And there is TRIG, the Technology Readiness Integration Grant, I believe. That's kind of the state component that collects that technical information from the districts and then analyzes it and then reports that to the state or other statewide entities in terms of needs.
Yeah.
Any questions on more test administration or technology?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Pastor Moody, I'm just going to break here to just indicate that I know that we're going to run out of time on our agenda. Again, is there a point, did you want to make it through the data? We have the 3-page literacy review. We just have a few bullets off of that handout. But we also have the NWEA and ACT data from high school. And if you would like for us to shift what we don't.
Why don't we do this? If it's possible, can we reschedule for that?
We can.
Okay, let's do that. Let's reschedule for that because I thought it was important for us to hear what the M-STEP preparations was going to be like, and I think we got a good idea of what's taking place. So for me, and speaking for me, my colleagues probably feel the same. That was good to hear today.
Okay, good.
So I know that we got reading and literacy coming up. We can always move that to the next agenda.
Okay.
Because I do believe that reading and the literacy piece is going to go quite well with that preparation for the M-STEP. But you got to have that. Those kids to be successful, and for those teachers to make the transition to teaching material. So if my colleagues don't mind, we can move this to the next agenda for the next meeting.
So we will move the remainder of the
Yes.
agenda, okay. So that works well for us, and it sounds like we have an agenda already set for June,
Okay.
and your handouts are online.
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from you guys? Anything from Mrs. Evans? I want to say thank you to the staff, and thank you for the work that you bring to us.
Excellent.
It is very important that we hear that we can transcend it to other people, and to even give you guys a pat on the back and say, keep up the good work.
Thank you for hearing from us.
Can we go with you? Can we go with you?
It's the 16th. I'm returning that day, but
That's the Sister Cities program, eh? Yeah, I used to take those trips, so I have a good time. I went to Africa quite a few times. We are adjourned.
Okay.